Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on working with custom columns in Intella. So what are custom columns? Well, before we answer that, we first need to understand how Intella processes and displays data. So when indexing a data source, Intella will unpack each file and extract all of the parts for that file. Then Intella will index everything that contains text from those parts, and basically when you do your keyword searches, you're searching over all of that text that has been indexed. So during the indexing process, Intella will also kind of categorize certain parts of the indexed text that we call metadata, and it will put all that metadata into predefined fields which we see as columns in Intella or the Intella table view. For example, the different types of date metadata are placed into the various date columns that you can see in the screenshot here. So these columns that you see in Intella are basically built-in standard columns. Note that although Intella indexes all of the text for an item so that it can be searched, Intella does not put all of that metadata which has been indexed into columns. So Intella is designed for efficiency, so it places commonly used metadata such as the date fields, the file name, subject, size, type, those kind of commonly used fields into columns. But there are various other non-common metadata fields that are still searchable because they're in the index, but they are not put into these sort of standard columns in Intella. So sometimes the user may have some important metadata in their case which is not automatically put into one of those native Intella columns. The user may need this metadata in a column for some other reason. Maybe it's for exporting or reporting or some other purpose. So Intella has a feature called custom columns that can be used to create new columns in Intella. And in this sample screenshot here, I've created a custom column for the list ID field, which is found in the headers tab for emails. And you can actually see this information now in a column on the screen being displayed. So I guess the answer to the initial question, what is a custom column? So a custom column is basically a new column that you create in Intella in the details table, and that holds the metadata that you have that you want to show. So custom columns can be created in two ways in Intella. The first way to create a custom column is to use the custom column wizard, which is basically you go to the file menu and custom columns option. So that wizard allows you to create custom columns for any of the fields that you see in the headers tab and the raw data tabs when you're previewing items in Intella. And this method is typically used when metadata is already in the case, or you may set up custom columns before you actually index your data, but you know what these metadata fields are, and basically Intella does not put them into a column by default. And the second way to create a custom column is to use the field mapping options when ingesting a load file or when importing an overlay. And that method is typically used when there are items already in the case, but the user has additional metadata external to Intella, so it's not stuff that's already been indexed, that they want to actually bring into Intella, and they want to attach that metadata to items that are already in the case. So those are the two methods for adding custom columns in Intella. Let's go into demonstration now, and I'll show you how those two methods are done. So I have a case up and running, and I have various items in the case. Let's just open one of these emails. So first of all, we're going to look at creating a custom column using the custom columns wizard. And remember, this is for when you have data in the case already, but there's no column being created by Intella, and we want to put that information to a column. So that can be any of these metadata fields that are in the header or the raw data tab. So let's go to the headers, and what we're going to do in this demonstration, we're going to grab the MIME version field here. So basically your fields are named, they're in bold, and then the data that is in those fields for this particular item are not in bold, so that's the information there. And it's separated by that column. So basically if you're getting the field name, you don't want to copy that column at the end of the field name. So first of all, we copy that field name, go to the File menu, Custom Columns. This opens up the Custom Columns wizard, and then simply click on New. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that field name into the description, because I know that's the exact spelling of the field that I want to pull the data from. But you can type in a more maybe user-friendly name here. Now, custom columns can be in you can use different types of or different types of either text, or they may be a date type field. So if you're pulling date information from a field and you want to show that in the details table here, you'd use the date format here. And the reason for that is because then you could actually sort by date format. If you're pulling date date data and you put it down as text, when you go to sort it, you probably wouldn't sort properly. But there's other options in here, Boolean, true or false. If you're doing numeral sort of information, then you can use these integers and other things here. But for this demonstration, we'll just use the text type. Click on the plus, and again, we can filter this down if we really wanted to just look at maybe communication and emails. But I know that this information that we're going to do in this demonstration is just for emails anyway. I'm just going to leave this on any, so it's only going to pull it from emails. That field that we copied earlier is actually in the headers tab, and we need to place that field name here. Now this has to be exactly the exact spelling of what you see in the headers tab. If it's not, then it's not going to be able to pull data from the field. Let's go OK on that. Now just before we close this window out, there's kind of a bit of flexibility here. So we've added one sort of custom column in here. You can actually add more than one if you want to add more than one, and then you can use these other functions, like you can join the values together, or maybe you have two columns and maybe for some items one of those columns is populated and the other is not, and vice versa for other items. So then you could use the use first non-empty value option there. Go OK on that. So that's created our custom column, and we'll close that window out. Now we don't see our custom column in the table view by default, and that's because we need to go and first turn it on. So if we go right over under the timeline here, we have the field chooser, and if we scroll right down to the bottom of the list, we can now see our brand new custom column that we created. So let's add that, and I'm just going to drag that up here under item ID and go OK on that, and that shows us our custom column now that we have in our table view. But there's no data in here, and the reason for that is these columns get populated when you index. So we would need to re-index this case here for this column to be populated. So the idea of custom columns is maybe before you do your indexing, you create all the custom columns that you need, then you index your data, and these will be populated during the indexing process. But I'm not going to make everyone sit around and watch the indexing, so I've already done that in this other case, and this is basically what you see here. It's been populated. So remember, that is when you have metadata fields that have been indexed in Intella or will be indexed in Intella, but there is no standard column in Intella for it to go in, so you can create those custom columns. So now let's look at the second method, and that is to do with load files and overlays. So let's go to File, Import Load File. Now, an example for a load file will be, let's say you've been given a load file and they've provided extra metadata in it. So maybe it's something to do with related to the case or related to some special items or something like that. There's extra metadata that's been given to you in the load file, but Intella doesn't have a column for that natively. So you go through the process and add a column in the process, and we'll sort of step through that when we do the overlay side. An overlay is a little bit, it can be used for load files as well. So let's say you had a load file provided and it was all these scanned documents, and then the week later they gave you an overlay file that had more information about those scanned documents that they want to tie to those documents. That's an overlay file. So the items are already in the case, but you just want to add more metadata to them. And that's what we're going to do in this example. So I select the overlay, and I will go and grab an overlay file, and we'll go next on that. And because it's an overlay CSV file, I need to change that field there. And this is basically the overlay file. So the item ID is a reference number. So when you're bringing in an overlay, you need a reference number so it can tie into the item ID of the case. The type field here is just for my purpose so that I could go and edit this in Excel. And basically, this is the overlay field that we want to bring in. This is the information we want to bring in. This is a typical e-discovery type field that's usually required when you're doing e-discovery. Is email, basically it's saying, is the item an email? And the answer is yes or no. So basically for the emails, I've typed in yes, and for everything else, I've typed in no. And it's this field that we want to overlay into the case that we have here. All right, so the next step is then to map the fields. And for a load file overlay, this is your overlay file here. So we have those three fields in there, the item ID, the type, and the email, or is email field. And we need to tie those to Intella columns. And because we're using an overlay, we have a reference number. So that one's taken up automatically. We're going to ignore the type because I don't want to change that. That's just what I use to distinguish between emails and non-emails. But it's this field here, the is email field, we want to populate. So in Intella, there is no is email field in here. So we have to create one. So right down the bottom, we see a list of our custom columns. And this is our mine version number that we did in the previous example. So we just click on the add button. Name is automatically populated here. Again, you have different types that you can choose. We're going to use the text type here. And that's going to create the custom column just like that. So it's kind of quite easy. And then we can populate that to our overlay column that we want to bring in. Let's go check for errors. There's no errors, that's good. And let's import that in. So this is kind of a small, very small overlay. This won't take very much time to bring in at all. So we'll just let that process. And that is done. So again, you won't see it automatically pop up here in the table. We have to go and turn that on. So we go over to our field chooser, scroll down to the bottom. There's our is email field there. And let me just bring that back up to that position. We go OK. And there's our overlay data in the case. So we can sort by that column, and that will show us all the emails in the case. So those are the two ways you can create custom columns in Intella. And that's pretty much it for the demonstration. So let me just quickly check if there are any questions. And it doesn't look like there are any questions. So I want to thank everyone for coming on the webinar today. If you have not done so already, please register for the next webinar, which is the triage in W4, which will be very a good webinar. And everyone have a wonderful day, and thank you very much.